Welcome, juniors and early teens, to Sabbath School. I know you may be watching this in your bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, anywhere else in your house, but once again, I welcome you, both juniors and early teens, to this digital format of your Sabbath School for Sabbath March 21. Yes, it's juniors and early teens. I'm combining you guys. Your lessons lined up quite nicely, and we'll be using the early teens title and subtitle, which is Jesus, the Ultimate Hero, as the title. And I love the subtitle. It's We Know Him, clearly referencing Thor's line in Thor Ragnarok when Hulk bursts through those doors. I know him! He's a friend from work! Well, this lesson will go through and show how we can truly know Jesus, and maybe a bit better than just a friend from work. We're going to start with an activity. I'm going to write the names of some superheroes on the whiteboard, and then we're going to write down some good qualities and bad qualities about these superheroes. Now, these good and bad characteristics may pertain to how they are as a superhero, or who they are as a person, like their good qualities and their bad qualities in their character, or how they spend their free time, how they spend their time in general, how they spend their money, their resources. It can cover anything. Now, while I'm writing this on the board in time lapse, I encourage you to talk about it with your parents, your siblings, your family, whoever may be in the house with you. Discuss it for yourselves. Bring up some superheroes that you guys like and talk about their good and bad characteristics as well. I'm going to get to writing. Pause if you need more time with your at-home discussions, and we'll be back here in just a moment. All right, now would be the time to pause the video if you're still going strong in your discussions at home about the superheroes that you came up with to talk about. If you're done or you're ready, then feel free to stay tuned to this and don't bother pausing. Some of the heroes that I wrote on the board that we'll cover here in the video are Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, a lot of mans, Captain America, Wonder Woman, finally not a man, and Hulk, sort of a man, but weird beast thing. Anyways, if you know his story, you know that it's complicated. So, I also wrote up some reasons why they are perhaps good heroes or good people, just in general, and also why they, well, maybe not that they're a bad person or a bad hero, just some things that could definitely be improved upon. For example, let's take a look at Superman. Fairly standard. Some of the good things is that he's altruistic. Altruism, if you don't know that word, it basically means that you put the good of others before yourselves. You are altruistic, looking out for the good of all. And just in general, this is from the movies and the comics, he is basically just a nice guy. When people interact with him as Superman and Clark Kent, he genuinely seems to be a good person. So those are some good things. So we'll do all the good things first. We have Batman. He is self-sacrificing. It's related to altruism. Superman, I think, could also fall into this category. But Batman, we see in some of his movies that he's willing to take the blame, take the fall for mistakes that other people have made. It takes a big man, a big person, to do something like that. Also, he trains others. This hasn't been too prominent in the movies recently, but Batman and Robin is a common phrase, people often think of Robin when they think of Batman. Batman and Robin, there's also Batgirl. There have been multiple Robins as well. Some go off to do their own thing, but it's actually pretty cool. That's one of the hardest things to do, I think, as a leader, is to train the future leaders. And so that is something I think Batman actually gets quite well. It wasn't always his choice. Sometimes the Robins found out about him and wanted to join him, but at least he rolled with it, right? Spider-Man, he is willing. And what I mean by that is he is a kid, at least to start off with. a kid could very easily just want to use their powers for themselves, or just focus on school and their free time and their friends and maybe perhaps dating and all that sort of stuff. But the fact that he's willing to use his powers for good, especially as a teenager, I think shows some good things, good qualities in him. And not only that, but he is willing to grow. He's willing to grow. You can see this in some of the movies as well, as he starts off being kind of selfish, but then with the passing of Uncle Ben, or shall I say the murder of Uncle Ben, he starts off his Spider-Man trip as being vengeful, just looking for one person. But during that time, he starts to grow and realize that he has a responsibility with these abilities to use them for good. And so he starts that growth process. We have Iron Man, who in the MCU, thankfully, also falls under the growth characteristic. But for the most part, some of the qualities is that he's fun and funny. Sometimes you need a little humor in rough situations to make things go by easier or quicker or stuff like that. And that's something that definitely Iron Man and Tony Stark is good at. Captain America, perseverance and strong willpower. Those two sort of go hand in hand. I think in order to have good perseverance, you need a strong will. Dedication to your beliefs and to your values. Perseverance, if you're not sure what that means the willingness to keep going, to keep doing things, to keep trudging on even when you don't want to anymore. But you do it because you should, and it's a good thing to do. And Captain America definitely has that from his famous line, "I can do this all day." We have Wonder Woman. She is confident to the point of when she shows up in her movie in World War I, it's actually quite humorous because World War I is an era where, shall we say, not as gender equal as we are today, and we could still stand to improve some, but that's a whole different topic. But she comes in and she's confident, and it throws a lot of men into a tizzy, like, what do we do with this woman? Because she actually knows her stuff, she knows what she's talking about, and she's good at it. And also, similarly to Superman and some of the others on this list as well, she is a genuinely good person as well. She cares for humans. She cares for the people that she's protecting. And Hulk, I'm going to be honest, it took me a second or two to remind myself of some of the good things. Of course, if we're thinking of Bruce Banner, his counterpart, it would be a lot easier to get good things. But I was able to come up with helpful and strong support, literally. Strongest Avenger right there. But he's helpful, and what I mean by that is I know Endgame switched things up, but the Hulk that most of us knew growing up, he's never going to be the brains of the operation. He's never going to be the one to make the game plan that the rest of them follow. But he is often a vital part in the plan that people like Captain America or Iron Man put together. So he is often a vital part and is super useful and helpful in those situations. So those are some of the good qualities that these heroes have. Feel free to write in the comments if you think of other good qualities that these heroes have, or other heroes that perhaps you talked about. Share some of their good qualities as well. And now, on to the bad side. Once again, this may not necessarily mean that overall they're bad people, but everyone, you and me, we both have some things that make us a decent human being, and not so much, shall we say. Superman, once again, it was a little difficult to find some bad things for him because mostly we think of him as the ultimate good guy. But I was able to find some. He's actually, in certain storylines, he can be quite impulsive and reckless. What I mean by this is that sometimes he puts his heart over his head, and normally he has all the abilities to be able to make that work for him. But sometimes he rushes into things without thinking, and Lex Luthor's there waiting with kryptonite, and now there's a big problem. So if he would actually sometimes take a step back and think things through, well, we might have some shorter movies, but he might be a bit more successful as well. Batman, arrogant/prideful. This is one that can unfortunately go for a lot of these superheroes. The reason I'm putting him there is because he chooses to operate outside of the law, which is not recommended. One could argue that his police force there in Gotham is corrupt, and so this is the way he feels he has to go about things. But still, there are much better ways he could go about this. Like, he's rich. He could help boost Gotham's economy, make people have more money so they wouldn't need to rob places, and yeah, anyways. But he's also distrustful. He is distrustful. Fun fact, he keeps kryptonite in his Batcave if in case Superman should ever go bad. That's not exactly the storyline we saw in Batman vs. Superman, but I think it does a good job to show just how distrustful he is of good people. We have Spider-Man. As I mentioned in the good side, Uncle Ben, he felt guilty. And while there are factors in that story that you could trace back to him, like he could have stopped the guy before he killed Uncle Ben, but that's getting complicated. He also carries not only that guilt, but guilt of other losses and other failures with him, to the point that it discourages him quite a number of times during his superhero-dom. I don't know if that's a word, probably not. He's also a little unbalanced and untrained. That's not quite as bad, since over here he is willing to grow. But sort of like Superman, sometimes he puts his heart above his head and he rushes into things without thinking them fully through. And, well, once again, we might have shorter movies, but he may have more successes, or sooner successes, if he were able to take a step back and think things through a bit more. Iron Man is another one who suffers from the arrogant and prideful side of his abilities, of his powers. To be fair, he is really smart, so one could argue that he does have a lot going for him, a lot on his name, but he rubs it in your face and he's kind of a jerk about it. So while he is fun and funny to watch, I feel like I would never want to actually hang out with him because he's a jerk. He's often fun and funny at other people's expense. Now, once again, I know the MCU showed him have a character growth along their whole string of movies, but I'm looking at the stereotypical character, and not what he ended up being. He ended up being quite the hero by the end of his story arc in the MCU. Captain America, I feel like he's a little softer on the arrogant and prideful side, which is why I put stubborn, but they're clearly related. He basically, once he gets an idea in his head that he's right about something, good luck getting that out, and hence Cap 3, Civil War. I know he was on the good side of things, but still, he was still very stubborn about it and not really even willing to listen to the other side of things, which is not a good trait. Normally, even if you do believe you're right, it is wise to open up and be willing to listen to the other side. Partly going into that, he is very much a traditionalist. Now, part of this is because he was frozen in the 1940s and woken up in our time, so his thinking is going to be, shall we say, a little outdated at times. But it's often very much his way or the highway, and that was sort of like he goes back to traditional mindsets in a lot of the ways he acts and thinks. Wonder Woman. I realized that she's actually quite similar to Captain America in this regard, as it's the same words, just a different order. Part of that is because of her background. She's even older than Cap. But she can be stubborn. I think that partly goes into sometimes, like, while confidence is very good, I think sometimes she goes into the too confident realm. Once again, I think she's a little softer than being full-on arrogant and prideful, but it does lead her to being stubborn and a bit set in her ways, where, like Captain America, if she gets an idea in her head, she's often unwilling to listen to the other side. Even when she's right, or even when she's wrong sometimes, she's often, like Captain America, unwilling to listen to the other side. Hulk was probably the easiest to write for the bad side. Bad temper and reckless, and you're sitting there at home saying, but Ryan, that's the point of his character. I know, I get that. I really do. But it is true. He has a bad temper. That's kind of how Hulk comes out to play. And he is very reckless. While he can be a vital part, and show strong support in another superhero's plan to help save the day, he is often reckless and can sometimes ruin said plan. As in the Avengers movies, he frequently ends up fighting the other Avengers, which is a little counterproductive, as they should all be working together to fight the bad guy. So, not the greatest quality. I hope you had fun with that exercise. Maybe you learned a bit more about some of these characters or other characters you discussed at home that you do or don't like. Perhaps if you discussed it at home, maybe there were some shocking reveals. Maybe your sister has secretly hated Batman and you didn't know that before. Or maybe your dad grew up with a crush on Wonder Woman. I don't know. One thing is for certain, I'm pretty sure that if you're a Hagerstown member, you learned a lot more about what your youth pastor thinks about some of these characters, for good and for bad. But now, from this activity, it's now time to transition into the main point of the lesson. As the title says, Jesus, the ultimate hero. We just talked about a number of different heroes here. And perhaps at home, you discussed a bit more about these or different heroes that you picked. But now it's time to talk about Jesus, the ultimate hero. So, just here, as we listed some of the good qualities or characteristics and the bad qualities or characteristics of these heroes, let's take a look about what we know about Jesus from Scripture and who he is and what he did and what he said, and see how he measures up. See how he measures up to this list of heroes that we have here. Let's start over here on the bad side, because, I mean, from what we know about Jesus, we're not going to be on this side very long. Impulsive, reckless. Now, some of his actions may have appeared that way to certain people, such as the Pharisees, or perhaps from a human perspective, they might look impulsive or reckless, like leaving heaven to come down here to earth. I mean, I don't think I'd be willing to make that choice. From my perspective, that seems kind of impulsive or reckless. But from a heavenly divine perspective, Jesus is doing it out of love. Out of love for you, out of love for me, out of love for everyone here on earth. Arrogant / prideful? Nope. He called a lot of people out on being that, but he wasn't. Distrustful. Okay, here's what gets me. Okay? So Batman can't trust other people, right? But Jesus is so trustworthy that he trusts you and me with various responsibilities and ministries that he wants to see done on earth. He trusts us to get them done. I don't know what you think about that, but I just think that's kind of crazy. Like, I take a look at my life, and Jesus trusts me to be the youth pastor at Hagerstown Seventh-day Adventist Church. That strikes me as insane. I know my life. I know how much of a terrible person I have been, I am, and unfortunately probably will be in the future due to the sinful condition of humanity. And the crazy thing is, Jesus knows all of that stuff about me better than I do. Yet, he, for some reason, chooses to trust me with this position that, yeah, like I said, still baffles me. Like, there was no decision in heaven like, oh, hey, who should we put as the Hagerstown youth pastor? Oh, that Ryan fellow, he's holy enough. No, that is not what happened. Jesus trusts me to do this job, but ultimately he trusts me to trust in him. He trusts me to trust in him. He trusts you to trust in him with the abilities and skills that he gave you. Skills like musical talent or athleticism, or maybe you're good with tech. There are so many, maybe you're good at helping people, or teaching, or leading, or whatever. There are so many different talents and skills and abilities that you may have that Jesus has entrusted you with, and he will trust you for you to trust him with them. I think I said that right. Feel free to rewind and double check, but I think you get what I'm getting at. Down here, untrained, unbalanced. Nope, that's not Jesus. Guilt. Now, this one does sort of apply to Jesus in the sense that he took on our guilt. Any guilt that we feel from the sins that we commit or just from our sinful nature in general, he took that guilt upon himself at the cross. We'll get to the cross a little later. Keep that thought in mind. Once again, we have arrogant / prideful and jerk. No, I mean, some of the Pharisees might have thought he was a jerk to them, but they were being jerks to other people. And that's not to say you should be jerks to people who are jerks, but they were way too far. Jesus clearly knew what he was doing. Pray, if you're ever considering being a jerk to a jerk, maybe pray about it first. Stubborn and traditionalist. Jesus, I'm not going to say stubborn, but he held fast to his principles and to the values and beliefs and to who he was, to who his divine person was, who he was in the Father. He did stick to that, but I think that was more over here with like confidence. He knew who he was, not necessarily stubborn. Bad temper and reckless. Once again, the reckless, perhaps from a human perspective, some of his actions may seem that way, but from a divine perspective of such sacrificial love that he has, I believe in heaven it made total sense. In heaven it made total sense, even though it doesn't really for us. Bad temper. I know there are scenes where Jesus got angry. The most common one is when he flipped tables in the temple, but that was not out of a bad temper. That was out of a righteous anger. The Pharisees, the people who worked at the church, were cheating people out of money. They had their own currency and they had their own exchange rate. So instead of going and buying like a sheep for their offering at the marketplace, they would come here and they'd have to exchange their regular money at a really bad ratio. Like imagine you give me a $5 bill and I give you a $1 bill. That's the sort of thing they were doing. Not only that, but if they came with their own sacrifice, they would be like, you see there's a blemish. You can't sacrifice that person. There was no people sacrifices. That was a slip of the tongue. You can't sacrifice that sheep. But then secretly they knew it was totally fine. So they would take that sheep around and hide it, and they'd sell it to someone else while selling them another sheep that they probably did the exact same thing to. So Jesus had all the rights to be angry at that situation. Hopefully you would be angry if myself or our senior pastor tried to do that to you. We don't plan to. We do not plan on doing that. But hopefully if you ever do see a situation like that where people are cheating others who are in need and they're giving all that they can, I encourage you to do something about it. Tell someone. Stand up for those in need. So, now moving over to this list, let's see how Jesus measures up to this list. Altruism, altruistic, that means he puts the needs of others before himself. Clearly, the cross. If that's not the ultimate example of altruism, I don't know what is. Similarly to self-sacrificing, Jesus, he left heaven to come to earth, which was already a big self-sacrifice, but he lived his life for others, so he self-sacrificed his life while he was alive, and he self-sacrificed his life in his death on the cross, taking the punishment that I deserve, that you deserve, that we all deserve, taking it for himself. And I skipped one. Jesus was a nice guy. I mean, reading from the Bible, I wish I could have walked and talked with him just like his disciples did. Jesus trained others. He picked people to train in his teachings, in his ways. And thanks to those 12 disciples, as they also trained others and they did mission work, that's ultimately why we're ended up here today. They started the Christian church. So because Jesus was able to train others, and those people were able to do mission work and train others and train others and train others, it led to this entire Christian movement. We have willing. Jesus was willing. You know the Garden in Gethsemane, when he's about to be arrested and taken to be crucified, he prays that the Father would take this cup from him, but ultimately he says, not my will, but your will be done. So he was willing to go through this altruistic self-sacrifice for you, for me, for all of us. And I firmly believe that he was fun, and he was a funny person. Just think, who are the types of people you want to be around? Do you want to be around the boring, dull people? No. At least I don't. I prefer being around people who are fun, who are funny, who are happy people. In the Bible, it says that the children wanted to come to Jesus. When I was a kid, I didn't approach very many adults. I was shy as a kid. But it was the funny ones and the fun ones who you wanted to be around. So if these little kids are wanting to be with Jesus, I think Jesus was a fun and sometimes funny person. For example, when he says, who lights a candle and puts it under a bushel? I think he's making a bit of a joke there. He's like, who does this? Perseverance. Jesus clearly was perseverance. At any point in the crucifixion process, at any point in his life, he could have called down angels to his aid to rescue him, but he knew that ultimately he had to go through this path to save us. He knew he had to stick with it. He knew he had to persevere. He had a strong willpower. Partly, if you read the Bible, you see he often separates himself from the crowd and goes to pray to his Father. I think that's a key point in how to have a strong willpower, is to be in constant communication with your Heavenly Father, with Jesus Christ, with the Holy Spirit. Keeping in touch with God through devotions, through prayer, through Scripture. He is also confident. Some of the heroes on this list get too confident, hence the arrogant, prideful, stubborn things over here. Jesus is confident in himself, but he's not too confident. He's not overly confident to the point of going that direction. Once again, he's a good person. He's a nice guy. And he was helpful, and is helpful, currently still is helpful, and a strong support to the plan of salvation, ultimately. He knew that there was a part that needed to be played that involved death, and he was willing to help support that plan by being that sacrifice, for you, by being that sacrifice for me. If that isn't worthy of the title of being the ultimate hero, I don't know what is. If you are fuzzy on the details around the crucifixion, I encourage you to read Matthew chapter 27. Once again, that's Matthew chapter 27, from verse 1 all the way to the end. It has a good section of Jesus' life, of the crucifixion. It starts from Pontius Pilate, talks about Judas's reaction. It talks about the people's reaction and the criminals that he's crucified with as well, their reactions, their responses. One of them responded in a good way. One of them responded in a bad way. It talks about his death on the cross, his time in the tomb. Matthew 27. He went through all of that for you. He went through all of that for me. Jesus is truly the ultimate hero, because if he hadn't gone through with that, now I know that these are fictional characters, right? But let's take a look at real heroes who fight for what's right, who stand up for what's good, who hold on to the truth and share that. All of that would be pointless. All of that would be pointless if these fictional heroes were real and they were actually doing all these things to save people. All of that would still be pointless without Jesus' sacrifice, because all we would have is the sinful life that we have here on earth. But Jesus gives us hope. Because of his sacrifice, he saved us. I don't have to go through that punishment. You don't have to go through that punishment. Jesus saved you. Jesus saved me from a fate worse than death, and that fate is being separated from God. Jesus went through that so that we don't have to. I encourage you to accept Jesus as your Savior. Accept Jesus as your ultimate hero. Because without him, we would be lost. Without him, we would have no hope. But since Jesus is here, Jesus is real, he is present, he's with you, he's with me, we do have hope. We have hope of a future with him in heaven. Please accept his sacrifice, his actions as the ultimate hero for your own, so that we may someday be in heaven with him forever. Thank you for tuning in to the Junior and Early Teen Sabbath School program for March 21 at Hagerstown Seventh Adventist Church. Normally when you're leaving Junior's Early Teen Sabbath School, you get a guide magazine. Since we're doing things digitally, I cannot hand you a physical copy, but I can tell you to go to guidemagazine.org. Once again, that's guidemagazine.org. Go there and you can get the same stories and all the same content that you normally would from a physical copy. And while you're still here watching this YouTube video, please click subscribe and ring the bell so that you get updates about future content. Once again, during this time, we are praying for you. God bless. See you later on this channel.